Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a great time at the Icebreaker and you met some new folks. Up next, we've got Jennifer Petoff talking about why training is so critical to reliability. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. You've probably all heard of the saying, sink or swim. And in this talk today, we're gonna discuss the importance of training and why it actually matters to an SRE or DevOps practice. And I hope you'll come to agree with me that you definitely want to set your people up to swim and not sink in the process. So here we go. All right. Now, if this was a regular, in real life type conference, if we weren't failing over, so to speak, there's always the hallway track, there's the coffee chats, etc. So I thought I'd start with just telling you a little bit more about myself and the things I might mention in the hallway track, so to speak. So hi, I'm Jennifer Petoff. My nickname is Dr. J, and I actually work at Google in our office here in Dublin, Ireland. I have a PhD in synthetic chemistry, and that's where I got the nickname Dr. J. And obviously, I'm doing things that are far, far removed from chemistry these days, but all the more interesting career choices. I've been at Google for 13 years now, and I actually currently lead the SRE education team. So it's a training team that's actually focused on ramping up new SREs at Google, and I'm continuing production education around SRE principles, practices, and culture for the broader engineering community at Google. And I'm also a part-time travel blogger at Sidewalk Safari. Love to travel, although it's kind of sad during these times when we're all pretty much grounded. Speaking of the circumstances that bring us to this conference, I just wanted to say I hope everyone is as safe and as healthy as can be expected under these circumstances, and just wishing you all the best for you and your families. All right, so we're actually going to do a quick poll. And I think I actually have to submit this too. Let's see. So the key question here is, what types of training experiences have you actually encountered in your career so far? So take a moment to take the poll, and we'll check out the results in a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, I want to talk with you about why training is important. Like, why do we care? Like, why am I here to talk about this today? So I think the folks in this virtual room will agree that when you're becoming a site reliability engineer or a DevOps practitioner in the first place, or even if you're just ramping up on a new service, like there's a ton to learn. There's the ins and outs of the production systems that you're managing, incident management best practices, and more. The list goes on. And the reality is, some people think that training is actually about cramming in as much information into people's heads as possible, setting up this proverbial fire hose of information. But no matter how much you actually tell people, they're only going to retain a really small amount, especially if you're teaching to them or lecturing at them. The reality is, training is not about the fire hose of information. It's actually about, drum roll, believing in yourself. I know this sounds a little bit hokey, but really for reals, for adult learners, it's actually about building confidence. It's about fighting imposter syndrome, especially for people who are new to a team. And beyond this, going beyond confidence, training is actually also about driving or perpetuating a desired organizational culture. So just like these hot air balloons, training can give you lift. So training is not going to achieve a culture shift in and of itself. There's a number of things that have to happen, but it can certainly help you achieve your goals. Okay, so what kind of training options might you consider? How should you actually go about training your SRE or DevOps practitioners? So really, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to SRE training, but rather a continuum of training methods that lie along a continuum from low to high effort. So at the low end of the spectrum, you've got sink or swim. So this means you basically just let people figure things out on their own with no real guidance or support. Next up, you've got self-study, which is just like it says on the tin. You point people at relevant resources, but they are ultimately in charge of consuming the material on their own. The buddy system is about pairing people up. That's another option. You could also provide new members of your team with a mentor to answer questions or reverse shadow key processes and operations. Ad hoc classes or whiteboard sessions, they require a bit more effort. And then at the highest end of the effort spectrum, we have the systematic training program. And a training program has well thought out learning objectives and content to support those objectives, helping your students achieve those learning objectives. And the curriculum is generally offered on a consistent scheduled basis. All right, before I go on, I want to just double check the results of the poll. Let me see how this works. How do I tell what happens with the poll? Give me 1 second. All right, so thinking about current and past jobs, how would you describe the training experience? Sadly, the majority of people got sink or swim, 33%, followed by lots of reading and watching videos. So pretty much people, it seems people in the audience were focused more at the low end of the effort spectrum. Interesting, cool. All right, so let me just say a few words about these options. So a couple things right off the bat. You typically want to avoid sink or swim as an approach to training people if you value inclusivity. So sink or swim, this can breed stress, frustration, even attrition. It can also really contribute to imposter syndrome. For the other options, I recommend that you consider the return on investment on the effort you're actually investing in the training program in itself. So just a few words about higher touch options. There can be some advantages here, and they're mainly organizational advantages. So higher touch options that culminate with this full-fledged training program can really demonstrate leadership commitment to the development of their employees. They can ensure that everyone is speaking with one voice. Like, so for example, if you're relying on the buddy system, depending on who the buddy is, the results you get may vary. So, what are their opinions? What are their preferences and predilections? So you can get different results depending on who people are partnered up with. Higher touch options can also help imbibe the desired culture and reinforce desired behaviors. All right, let's crack on. So the next question, the first question that probably comes to your mind, after we've discussed some of the options, is what should I actually teach people? What makes sense? And before we do that, I thought there was one more poll. No, anyway, never mind. That's coming up later. Stick with me. Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was just what you might want to include in your training program. Sorry, where did my poll go? There's my poll. All right, cool. Just getting used to the new functionality. Sorry, folks. So before we go on and talk about, basically, I want to get an understanding of who's in the audience, because we're going to talk about different approaches you might want to take depending on the maturity of your organization in adopting a DevOps or an SRE practice. So have a go, and we'll look at the results in a moment. All right, brilliant. Back on track. So what you actually include in your training program really boils down to a few key dimensions. The first of these dimensions is maturity. So this is the maturity of your organization in adopting key principles, practices, and culture. So are you early on in your DevOps or SRE journey? Or are you old pros with a well-established practice? How familiar are people with SRE or DevOps? So this is zooming in, sorry. So there's the familiarity and experience. So familiarity is about zooming in on the individual. How familiar are they with your organization, with your infrastructure? And from an experience perspective, so have the individuals on your team worked as SREs or DevOps practitioners in another company, or are they brand new to the practice? So some dimensions to consider. And we just did the quick poll of who's actually in the audience. And I think the poll is closed. I'm going to take a quick looky-loo to see. There we go. Brilliant. So how would you rate the maturity of your organization? So the majority of folks are just getting started on their DevOps and SRE journey. And then we've got success. We are DevOps, 28%. So great to see some successful transformations in the mix. So like for those who are just getting started on their journey, this next section is going to be particularly relevant to you. So let's start by considering that case for those who are just starting out. How can you ensure that you minimize the pain on the potentially long and bumpy road ahead of adopting SRE or DevOps practice? Okay, so this is really the case of low organizational maturity. So you're just getting started in adopting DevOps or SRE principles and practices. So a key thing here is to really start by addressing any skill gaps. So you might want to ask yourself some foundational questions about your teams. So does your team use a defect tracking system like Jira or Bugzilla? Does your team have a project planning model that they use? Are you an agile shop? Is work done in a version control system? Are solutions clearly articulated and vetted by team members? So do you have design docs, testing plans before you actually start implementation? Does your team have a shared repository of commonly used tools and libraries? So if you answer most of these questions and say no, it's a good idea to start here and address some of the gaps with training to set yourself up for success. So start here. There's your map point. All right. So now on to step 2. So you really want to consider who you have on your team and how to tailor the message. So the reaction of individual team members to a proposed DevOps or SRE transformation, it's going to depend on how familiar they are with your organization and your current culture, crossed with their level of SRE experience. So have they practiced SRE elsewhere? So for folks who've just joined your organization and have little or no experience with DevOps or SRE, these are the kinds of folks you'd expect who are receptive and likely to just go with the flow. The people you need to watch out for potentially are those who've been in your organization a while, maybe a little bit skeptical, but like don't have a personal experience with DevOps or SRE. These folks may be resistant to the change, and if so, you need to address questions like, what's in it for me? Why is it different this time? If for example, this organizational transformation is on top of, ones that have kind of come and gone, crash and burn, so to speak, is this just the new hotness that's going to quickly fade? So for people who have existing SRE or DevOps experience who are bought in, these are really your catalysts. So empower these members of your teams to tell their stories. And again, try and through storytelling, help to convince some of the other folks who may be more skeptical about the approach you guys are going through. And again, tailor the format and content of your proposed training to address the unique needs of these different constituencies. All right. So next up, we have to discuss, so what about organizations that actually already have a well-established SRE team or DevOps practice? Now it's really all about building confidence and reinforcing the culture that you've built. So now we'll talk about how to build a training program for this particular use case. Okay, so this is the high organizational maturity use case. You've already got this well-established culture and practice. Now we need to dig in and we need to evaluate the mix of people on the team once again. So once again, we're going to do this along dimensions of organizational familiarity. So how much do people understand your particular organization? How long have they worked there? And SRE DevOps experience on the other hand. So let's look at the 4 quadrants that we have. So in the lower left here, we've got newbies. These are the people who are just joining the company, and they're also less familiar with DevOps and SRE practices. In the upper left, you've got internal transfers. So these are folks who are expected to have a high familiarity with your company, but low experience with SRE or DevOps practices. Old timers, these are the folks that know your company, they know your culture, they got this, they're well well able to articulate the principles, practices, culture that go throughout the org. And finally, you've got industry veterans. So these are folks that have a high level of experience with SRE or DevOps practices, but are actually new to your company. And there's a few things to just keep an eye out for in terms of what you might want to focus on for each of these groups. So for newbies, they typically need the most attention. So they need to learn both your infrastructure and your culture. Internal transfers, they may know your systems, but they may be less familiar with DevOps or SRE practices if they're coming in from a different org. So focus here on those aspects. Old timers, so these are the folks, they're experienced in both dimensions. So go for technical depth to really help them unlock additional career growth. And then the industry veterans, like they need to ramp up on your infrastructure and your processes. In some cases, they may need to unlearn some bad habits, or just may need to shift a little bit if your company and organization operates a little differently than their previous one. So focus more on the specifics of getting them up to speed. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the what. Up until now, actually, we focused on evaluating your organization, thinking about what you might actually want to include in the training program. But there's actually a whole nother side of things that we really need to consider. So I actually like to draw an analogy between the software development lifecycle and building and running a training program. So in both cases, we need to consider both the what and the how. So for software development, we're talking about the what, which is shiny product features, and the how is all about how you deploy the product or service to production in a reliable way to meet the needs of your users. For a training program, the what is all about the training content. What are the concepts you're trying to teach? What points are you trying to get across? Whereas the how is all about deploying a consistent and reliable training program that meets the needs of the students. So we need to consider both aspects. So now let's talk about the how, the all-important how of delivering a training program. And the how is really about operations, and there's two dimensions that I want to consider today. So size and growth rate. So simple, size is just how big is your organization, and growth rate is how fast are you growing. So these are the operational dimensions that are going to inform how much effort it makes sense to invest in training. So if your organization is small and growing slowly, focus in on one-on-one knowledge transfer through mentoring and shadowing. If your organization is small but growing rapidly, invest in onboarding program. So yeah, you'll get the biggest bang for the buck. If you are both small and growing, I missed one. Yeah, if your organization is large and growing slowly, excuse me, I will dial it back. Yeah, if your organization is large and growing slowly, invest in ongoing education, because you're not incorporating new people. Small and growing rapidly, invest in onboarding. And if you're both large and growing rapidly, it can make sense to invest in a full life cycle training program. And the Google SRE team, we actually fall into the upper right quadrant. We're large and grow pretty rapidly. And this is why we've actually invested in a full-time team to develop a full life cycle training program for folks. So to summarize, you want to invest the most under conditions of rapid growth. You'll get the biggest return on investment if you do. Small but rapidly growing organizations really benefit the most from onboarding training. So getting the newbies up to speed. And then don't forget about your existing workforce. Invest in ongoing education for their career developments. Okay, now we're gonna switch gears slightly. We've talked about the what, the training content. We've talked about the how, the operational considerations. Now I want to talk about the where, as in where to begin. And I have two words for you, actually one acronym for you about this, where to begin. ASBAT, which basically stands for a student should be able to. So this is all about creating actionable learning objectives to inform everything else down the road. So let's talk about possible ASBATs, or students should be able to for a training program. So your first thought might be something like, understand the foo service. In reality, what you want to do is focus in on things that you can actually, like behaviors you want to drive, and things you can actually observe and measure. So better ASBATs could be something like, a student should be able to use $tool to identify how much memory a job is using. A student should be able to interpret a graph in your preferred monitoring tool to identify the health of the foo service, and move traffic away from a cluster using a drain tool in 5 minutes. So this is all about observing and measuring how training is actually applied. And there's actually a whole instructional design model that you can leverage. It's a simple model that can aid in the development of your training content. And instructional designers call this the Addie Model, where Addie stands for analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. So you start by analyzing the needs of your organization. You design a training plan based on well-defined ASBATs or learning objectives. You develop the training content, pilot and implement that content, implement the program, roll it out, and then evaluate the effectiveness. And it's a good idea to keep a really tight and iterative feedback loop to help drive improvements throughout the process. So in the last 9 minutes or so that I have, I want to get meta for a minute. So this talk is about training site reliability engineers, about training DevOps practitioners. So it turns out that the foundational principle of SRE, these foundational principles, can be applied to the training program itself. So if we take a look at the service reliability hierarchy, originally developed by Mikey Dickerson, former Google SRE, fixer of healthcare.gov in the US, and a former administrator of the US Digital Service, and published in the original site reliability book about engineering book about 4 years ago, we've got this service reliability hierarchy. And the hierarchy covers the elements that go into making a service reliable, from the most foundational elements to the most advanced elements, from monitoring all the way up the chain to product. So it turns out that the elements of the service reliability hierarchy can actually be applied in the training context. So, we do monitoring in the form of attendance tracking and survey feedback. We address issues that surface via your monitoring. We occasionally write postmortems when things go wrong, and we can actually learn from that failure. We do a lot of testing of new content and programs. And all the while, we're scaling our operations by looking for opportunities to vanquish toil, automate away toil, so we can make the most of our limited human resources. And it's only when we do these things that our program is really fully actualized, we can realize that full potential of the curriculum design and the training program itself. So you may be asking the question, is more effort always better? We actually want to take another page from the SRE playbook. And just like with SRE, no, more effort is not always better. It's about striving for a balance between competing concerns. And in this case, it's about balancing effort versus the results that you'll get. So ideally, what you want to do with your SRE training, applying this principle in practice, is do just enough to meet the needs of your students. Keep them happy, but not too happy, and consider trade-offs and avoid polishing a diamond. If you've got a great program, does it make sense to invest a bunch more effort to make it 10% better, or reinvest that effort into an entirely new program that addresses additional training needs? All right, so let me give a quick example. This is how I want to talk about how we use monitoring to actually drive improvements to the Google SRE onboarding program. So we're going back to the base of the service reliability pyramid. So what did our monitoring tell us actually 6 to 12 months after we launched the original SRE EDU orientation program? You can see a few key themes emerging here in these comments. Our SREs wanted a more hands-on education program, not the lecture series that we were actually giving them at the time. There was really a strong request for learning by doing. So what did we do? We took that input, iterated, and came up with a new program design that actually addressed these particular concerns. And if you're interested in learning more about how we moved away from passive listening, worked on a curriculum that allows students to troubleshoot a real system that we built for this purpose, where you basically get the facilitators to back off more and more, helping the students build confidence, and working together in groups to resolve realistic breakage scenarios where we take the system down. This video that's listed here, bit.ly.com/SRE-edu. It's a talk my colleague JC Van Winkle and I gave at SRECon last year, and goes into more of the system development and some of the interesting infrastructure considerations behind the scenes. Okay, but so we did all that, exciting times. What does our monitoring tell us now? So our students are clearly happier with the hands-on exercises. So we've got a couple comments here. The breakage scenarios in SRE-edu were awesome. It was the funnest week I had this year. Overall, it made me feel more connected to production and the technology, which made me really happy. And this comment makes me really happy because it's actually from one of our VPs of SRE who actually decided to spend a week going through the training program. So that was super gratifying. And bonus points, version 2.0 of SRE-edu orientation is actually also equipped for with better observability. So instead of just asking students what they thought about the training, we can now observe concrete job-related behaviors. So things like using a system diagram, students are able to diagnose issues using SRE tools. We see how people annotate an outage, mitigate realistic production issues, and find root causes and propose solutions. So there you have it. It's a key example of how we applied SRE principles to our SRE training program at Google. And with that, I'm going to begin to wrap up here. Let me leave you with a few key takeaways. So number one, training is an investment. It's an investment in your organization and in your people. It's important to evaluate the costs and the benefits. You want to make sure you're investing the right amount in a training program. If you're hiring one person, you probably don't want to develop a whole bunch of infrastructure and classes and whatnot, but maybe choose a lower effort approach. Where to invest? So this depends on the what and how of your organizational circumstances. So do you have a well-established SRE practice? Are you just getting started? And then, the how pieces are around how big you are and how fast you're growing. And finally, walk the talk. So you can apply SRE and DevOps principles to the training program itself for a consistent and reliable experience. So time for a final poll. So this one here, I think you probably realize, like, SREs and myself in particular, we tend to be very data driven. I'm actually just curious if this talk resonated with you, if you plan to use any of the things that I mentioned. So would appreciate, do you plan to do anything as a result of attending this talk? Please select all that apply. And it's perfectly okay if you're like, no, I don't buy it, nothing really, but would love to hear from you just so I can continue to see how this talk works for folks. And with that, I am just going to move on and say thank you. I want to say thank you to my SRE-edu core team and to all our volunteers. So the folks here in the blue unicorn, rainbow unicorn shirts. So this is the core team that I work with. Make me so excited to come into work every day. Like, I love my job. I love working with this group of people. And like I said, applying SRE principles to our training programs every day. And again, we aren't able to do this without the dozens, if not hundreds, of volunteers that work with us to teach, to be TAs, to help. We have deans that work with people on each site to make sure the students have the best experience possible in all of our programs. So thank you to everyone. And if you want to learn more, and I know I'm 1 minute, if you want to learn more, I just wanted to call out, we wrote a report with O'Reilly Media. It's at this bit.ly link, bit.ly.com/training SREs, if you want to check it out. And you can also find me on Twitter @JenSki if you'd like to follow up the conversation. And I will also be over on Slack answering questions afterwards. And that is all.